Yeah. It's official, I've got it. Spring fever, that's right. It is actually early April. It's gorgeous out right now. Absolutely beautiful. But you know, there's a thing about spring fever. With all of this beautiful stuff right now in the garden center, anything from perennials to tropicals to early flowering outdoor pansy viola bulbs to our beautiful annuals, it's easy to get into spring fever here in the garden center and to get outside and say, maybe I should do a little planting. And if you've ever been here early, you know that early we also happen to have some really spectacular things that maybe won't show up again. So come on in and garden. But the thing you have to watch out for early is actually frost. And that's hard to believe, especially this particular year, because it's been really warm. As a matter of fact, it happens to be 80 today. But anytime we have a really warm spring and that things start to push and get going, you get spring fever. And you can come in and buy some of these things, but you're gonna have to be careful and watch out for that weather still. Now, historically, we really could still get a frost until the end of May. So a frost is actually when dew freezes. And so it can happen all the way up to the end of May. And the problem with frost, so it might get down and get cold, but the specific problem with frost is it's actually the water vapor that's freezing. And it's freezing on top of the plants. And anytime something freezes, that water freezes, it actually, the way it freezes, it forms shards. Think of the frost that's on your windows. You may have seen that before, or maybe as a kid you saw it. It went up the windows and it was really neat, formed those patterns. Well, it's ice crystals. So when it gets on a leaf and then it forms those ice crystals are sharp. So it actually can do damage to those leaves, even things that are hardy perennials. So for instance, this is a columbine. And on the cold days here, this perennial has been just fine in our perennial department with some light cover. It doesn't care. But I would tell you to protect this from frost because it's earlier, it's ahead of where the columbines are that are in the ground right now. So these leaves are more tender. They'll take the cooler wind and all of that, but you're gonna wanna protect them from frost. Now other things aren't gonna tolerate a cold snap at all. So something like this tropical hibiscus, you're just, go ahead and grab it, put it in a sunny window. It's not gonna wanna go out, actually, forget frost, it doesn't wanna go out if temperatures are gonna drop below 50 degrees. But makes a great houseplant with a south window or a west window. Petunias, they could go out on days like today, but really, you could even do your container baskets. But you gotta watch out. You're gonna have to bring them in when it's below 50. So any days like this, pot them up, get them growing, but this African daisy, these gerbs, they all can be planted in a pot, but I wouldn't put them in the ground yet. Things like this viola, go ahead. It doesn't care. In fact, I had some in my pots that got a frost last week. They looked terrible. They thawed. It was only about 28 degrees and they were fine. So that said, watch what you have. Okay, how do I protect from frost? Well, one of the ways you can do it is watch that weather, gotta keep ahead of it. But if I'm watching the weather, I can go ahead and I can throw out a fabric. So whether it be a tablecloth, a sheet, probably folded over, a towel, anything that's sort of a fabric, but not a tarp, not a plastic. They're gonna form water underneath them that can't escape. It's gonna sit back on that plant. There's no thermal help there, and it's gonna freeze. Same problem, so don't use that. If you have something that you put out during the day, like I said, happens to be 80 today, out she goes, in it comes. These guys, just make sure that frost cloth, go ahead and put a stake so it's just over the plant. Other thing about your frost cloth or your frost protection you might put it down before the sun goes down. As soon as the sun goes down, you're gonna lose the help that the earth and actually some of that moisture vapor provides you by actually adding some heat that's gonna be trapped underneath that fabric. That's why the fabric works. So there's some smart tips. Here's another one so you can do a little bit of recycling. You know these, maybe you have milk, maybe they're water. You can also use these as an old hot cap. So what you do is you cut off the bottom. I'm gonna probably stab myself here. Cut off the bottom, easy peasy. So maybe you seeded something in the ground that's coming up, or maybe you had an early transplant, you're trying to get ready. You can use this a little later in the season if we get a cold night. Your plant's planted in. Now you have a little cap. You can use it at night. This is in the ground. You can put this guy over it. It's gonna act like a little mini greenhouse. Now, if you don't want to take it off the next morning, what you do? Take off the cap, it'll let out some heat. Granted, if it's 80 degrees, it's still too hot. But this is gonna help you, especially with new transplant seedlings. This is a great little idea. But Kate, it's windy at my house. Okay. What you can do, cut a little further into like this handle, right like this, or maybe slightly cleverer than I am, like that. Now I have a hole, and I can take a stake, and I can put it right through there and stake it into the ground. So there you go. So those have been some of your smart gardening tips to help you through this time when there's just a little spring fever, but it's worth it. Come on in. We'll see you soon.